Okay, so today we are at the Loughborough University Performance Lab. I'm here with Lucia and we're going to be doing some testing today, trying to get some data for my 2025 training. Lucia, talk me through what you do here and the sort of athletes that you tend to work with.
So today we're going to do two different tests. So we're doing fuel utilization test. First one's going to be sub-maximal test and then a little bit of break, and then we're going to go into the max test. So in terms of the athletes that we work with, we work with a really wide range of athletes, anyone from starting their first 5K race, or they just started their cycling journey or triathlon journey, up to the professionals coming in, preparing for the World Championships, different environmental adventures, or going to the Olympics. So we have, like I said, two different tests. So today we're going to start with a little bit longer one. So the sub-max is divided into the stages. So it's 6-minute stages, with every stage getting harder and harder. And then every 6 minutes we're going to go 15 watts up for yourself until we're past a certain threshold. So this is the test where I'm stopping you, so once I know that we have all the data that we need. On this one, while the last couple of stages are probably going to feel pretty hard, there shouldn't be max out of effort, essentially. In the last minute of every stage, so 5 to 6 minutes, I'm going to be collecting a few different measures. So I'm going to be noting down your heart rate for the stage. I'm going to be taking a small blood vector from your right earlobe, and I'm going to be asking you how you feel. So essentially the scale goes from 6 to 20.
Okay.
There is no right or wrong answer to this one. It's literally whatever you're feeling at the moment. Don't overthink, don't think that we're expecting a certain answer or anything like that. Also, two stages can feel the same, essentially. So when it comes to the bloods, so I'm going to take a very small sample from your earlobe, and I'm kind of throughout the test I'm building your profile, so your lactate profile. So we are analyzing the blood straight away, so we can kind of pinpoint the point once the second threshold occurs. So the whole point of this is to get your training zones for this test. So the training zones are determined based on the thresholds. So we go with two different thresholds, so LT1 and LT2, so lactate threshold 1 and lactate threshold 2. There are a lot of different names in the literature. I know people call it differently, people calculate differently, but we go very simple, so LT1 and LT2. So when it comes to what they mean is LT1 kind of reflects the intensity that you can hold over several hours. It goes very well with your Ironman pacing, so people tend to use it as something that can hold over Ironman distance as a training. So anything below LT1 is nice and easy riding, recovery rides. You should feel very comfortable at the pace, essentially. When it comes to the fueling, because it can be held for a lot of hours, your body's predominantly relying on fats as a fuel. It doesn't mean that it's not using carbohydrates, it just means it's predominantly relying on fats. So we have a lot of fats in our body, and it's easy, so we can just go on forever, essentially, because we're not that limited with the source that we have. However, it's quite slow energy, so when we get to the higher powers, when the body needs that quick energy, it needs to start turning to carbohydrates as a predominant fuel source. So that's when we see the second increase in the lactate, second significant increase in your lactate levels, which kind of reflects that LT2, essentially. So LT2 is something that can be held between probably 30 to 60 minutes, depending on your fitness, depending on which event you're doing. So like I said, it's predominantly relying on carbohydrates as a fuel source. And once I'm sure that we have that second threshold, so once I'm sure that that second spike in your lactate levels occurred, that's when I'm going to stop you. So the first one should be a little bit easier, especially the first few stages are nice and easy, getting into it, just sticking it over really, and then it's going to get a little bit harder as you start approaching LT2. Because we're doing fuel utilization, so we're trying to get all the information around your fueling, so how good are you at utilizing fats, what amount of carbohydrates do you need to fuel, to be able to hold certain powers for certain distances. That's why we use 6-minute stages instead of 4, to make sure that everything is nicely balanced for each of the stage when we're collecting the data. And this test is a little bit longer, so we're expecting 8 to 10 stages for this one. So it's going to take a while, essentially.
Perfect, sounds good. Cool. Okay, we'll crack on then. the sub-maximal test, which is a longer test, sort of just working up in 15-watt increments to get my sub-maximal power, and now we're going to do a maximal test, which is going to be short intervals, but basically going up as hard as I can hold until I die, essentially. Well, hopefully not literally, it'll be a bit morbid, but yeah, it's going to be sort of going on for dear life. So yeah, and that's going to sort of just give us my VO2 max, right?
Yeah, so it's going to give us your VO2 max and your MEP, which is maximal aerobic power in this test. So yeah, just try to hold on for as long as you can.
Wish me luck.
So for as long as you can, just try to hold on. So just focus on every 20 seconds. Keep picking them off. Once it starts to get really hard, we're going to shout at you close.
Really good work. Come on, all the way on this one. Keep pushing, keep fighting. You've got this. All the way. Great job. Keep going, keep going. Keep pushing all the way. Keep going. Do it really well. Come on.
Great job, Jenny. Great job, Jenny. Really good work. That's really good. Well done.
How are you feeling?
Okay. Happy now it's over. Once we'd finished the sub-max and max test, it was time to have a bit of recovery before heading into the heat chamber. But first I took the opportunity to find out from Lucia how she supported Olympic gold medalist Cassandra Beaugrand in the build-up to the Paris 2024 Olympics. And I picked lead physiologist Rona Pierce's brain to get her expert take on what some of the terms we hear thrown around in endurance sport fairly often actually mean.
So I support triathlon performance sport here based in Loughborough, and essentially I provide any physiology supports, anything from the lab testing, so run and bike, heat preparation, altitude preparation, there are up to altitude camps, helping around the training scheduling, programming, field testing, so anything on the run, swim or bike, training camps and so on, essentially. Apart from that, it's obviously around education as well, so what does physiology mean, how they can use it, what are the different training zones, how can the sport be utilized, as particularly with the younger athletes coming in, like the education piece around the physiology is one of the key bits.
And in terms of how you worked with Cassandra Beaugrand towards her gold medals, what was that process like?
So Cass moved to Loughborough 2 years ago in the preparation for the Paris Olympic Games. And that's when she came under Loughborough Sport Support, essentially. So apart from me as a physiologist, I've worked with other IDT, so interdisciplinary team. We've had another physiologist, physiotherapist, nutritionist, SNCs, lifestyle support, all sorts essentially, and the coaches as well. So we all worked together, we came up with a plan of how to support Cass in the next 2 years leading to Paris, what are the race demands, when it comes to the physiology. So I tested her in the lab on the bike and run to know her physiology, where are the parts where she can improve, what do we need to focus on. After the Paris test event last year, we knew exactly what the race is going to look like, what the course is, and what essentially we need to focus on in the last year going to Paris. Apart from the testing and supporting her throughout the training, so either on the swim testing or the field testing like training camps and running sessions and so on. We've done a lot of heat preparation, so obviously Paris was expected to be quite warm, even though it's not crazy temperature, it's still warm enough to have a detrimental effect on the performance. Therefore, heat acclimation was one of the key things. We were lucky that she came 2 years before the Paris Olympic Games into the program, so we had time to test different various heat acclimation protocols, really nail down what works for her, how much she needs, how she responds, so really get to know her well, so that going to the last year we made a year-long plan of how this physiology support is going to look like for her, when are we going to do certain testing, when are we going to do heat acclimation blocks, to make sure that she's absolutely prepared for the day to deliver what she's capable of.
Perfect. And what was it like seeing her take that gold medal?
Oh, it was absolutely brilliant. It was very emotional moment, I'm gonna lie. It was 2 hours of being very stressed, and yeah, I don't think I've experienced anything like that. It's obviously very special to work with all of my athletes. They're a really nice group of athletes, quite successful, and we're all very proud of him. But obviously her crossing that finish line, especially because she's French in Paris, like that picture is always just gonna be in my mind. I mean, even if I just help her a little bit, like it was just an unbelievable moment.
I'm Rona Pierce and I'm the lead physiologist at Loughborough University.
Can you explain to us what VO2 max actually is?
Okay, so VO2 max is the greatest amount of oxygen you're able to take in and use. So it sets the ceiling on your aerobic fitness. So lactate thresholds are basically when there's a change in lactate during an incremental exercise test. So you do an incremental exercise test where you start at a nice easy intensity and it gradually increases. Every few minutes we do 4 or 6 minute stages, and you have a blood lactate sample taken at the end of each stage. So when you exercise, you use a mixture of fats and carbohydrates as a fuel. When you break down carbohydrates, you produce lactate. So at low exercise intensities, your body will predominantly use fats as a fuel. You've got a lot longer lasting supply of fats than you do carbohydrates. So for anything long endurance, then the better you can be using fats, the better. As exercise intensity increases, you have to start using more carbohydrate, and so therefore the rate at which you break down lactate increases, so the lactate will start to accumulate in your blood. And we look at the 2 break points, so which are the thresholds, so we call them lactate threshold 1, lactate threshold 2. Lactate threshold 1 is when your lactate values first start to rise above baseline, so that is kind of the edge of your easy training, so your easy training will be below or up to first threshold. Second threshold is when your lactate values really start to accumulate, so above that intensity you are using predominantly carbohydrates as a fuel. You're not going to be able to carry on indefinitely because you're not going to be able to replace them at the rate at which they're being used. Second threshold, depending on your endurance, can be sustained for around 30 to 60 minutes. So if you look at running as an example, first threshold often correlates well with marathon pace, and second threshold with 10k pace.
And a bit of a myth buster, because a lot of people, when they get the burning feeling in their muscles, they say, oh, I've got loads of lactic acid in my muscles.
Yes.
Is that actually lactic acid? What is it that causes that burning, tying up feeling?
Yeah, this is probably a physiologist's pet hate of when commentators and athletes talk about the lactate. So lactate is lactic acid and lactate are different things. So what the acid part is hydrogen ions, and that's what can cause that burning feeling. But when you produce lactate, you also then clear it. So the thresholds that I was talking about, when you're below your second threshold, and particularly when you're below your first threshold, you're always producing a bit of lactate because you're always using a bit of carbohydrate as a fuel. But then you will use that lactate as a fuel, and that's what will clear it. Once you go above the second threshold, you can't clear it as quickly as as it's being produced. So yes, lactate, hydrogen ions, lactic acid all do accumulate. But it's not necessarily a bad thing, particularly for an endurance athlete. Yeah, it's a bad thing if you go really hard, but at low intensities, it is actually used as a fuel. So we're going to do a session in the heat chamber with you. It's going to be a heat tolerance test, so essentially we will get you to exercise in Kona conditions and look at how you respond to the heat. So heat obviously makes it harder to exercise and places demands on your physiology that allow you to, make it harder to perform to your optimal physiology. So preparing for the heat is really important. We can do a range of different things in the chamber, and the heat tolerance test is a starting point. And then if somebody struggles in the heat, then doing a series of acclimation sessions can be really beneficial. That can either be in the chamber, or you can do it passively through the use of saunas and hot baths and things like that. And then doing another heat tolerance test at the end is really helpful because it then allows you to dial in your race strategy. So during the heat tolerance test, we look at how much you sweat and how much you drink, so you can learn whether you've consumed enough fluid to replace what you're losing. We'll also look at your sweat sodium concentration, so we put a small patch on your skin and then we analyse the amount of sodium in your sweat. So if you don't drink enough over the course of an Ironman, that's going to add up to you being very dehydrated, and that will negatively impact performance. If you're a very heavy salty sweater, then you'll be losing a lot of electrolytes again over the course of the Ironman. So in an hour that might not be a problem, but by the time you're getting towards the end of the Ironman, you might be quite you might have lost a lot of electrolytes, a lot of sodium. which again can negatively impact performance. Sodium loading is something that people talk about, and various different things can be different interpretations of that phrase. We talk about sodium loading as a way of expanding your plasma volume and so delaying the onset of dehydration. Some people talk about sodium loading just as take lots of salt and lots of sodium before a race, and they both are beneficial but in different ways. So just sort of taking in lots of salt through your diet, just you will sweat out more salt then, but you've also got a bit more room to play with. Sodium loading is where you take a high volume of fluid the 2 hours before you race with a high concentration of sodium in it, and it changes the osmolarity of that, as in the concentration of salt in the water means that you basically hold on to more fluid in your blood, so it slows down or delays dehydration. So that we would recommend that to somebody if they have a very high sweat rate or a very high sodium loss in their sweat, making it hard to replace just through conventional kind of sports drinks.
Next, it was time to head into the heat chamber. It was set up to mimic the conditions I'm likely to experience in Kona next year, around 30 degrees Celsius and 83% humidity. It didn't feel that bad at first, but after riding for a bit it started to get pretty steamy, so heat prep training is definitely going to be important for me over the next year to get ready for Kona. It was really cool to spend the day with the team in Loughborough getting to train like a pro, and a few days after the test, Lucia sent me through a full report which explained all my results and gave me some really great feedback on what I can focus on based on my individual physiology to get the most out of my training and racing. I've already started to incorporate some of the changes into my winter-based training, and I'm excited to see how I can progress over the next year. You can find out more about our day in the lab by reading the article on try247.com, which I'll leave a link for in the description box.